welcome to AANE's live stream, Infinity and Beyond. I know normally you're expecting Liv, but she is out being a rock star this month. So I will be your host today. My name is Jay Eveson Egler. I am a senior manager here at AANE. You all might also remember me from last year's June live stream. I am autistic and ADHD. I am also queer and non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. And today's live stream is going to be all about gender identity and autism. AANE is a collaborative organization. We offer a lot of different supports. This month, I think I'm going to focus on just sharing a little bit about some of the LGBTQ plus supports that we have in place. And just to let you guys know, we have a variety of support groups for people of various gender identities, people who are exploring different gender identities. We have an LGBTQ plus support group, a gay men support group. We have a variety of articles that people can read on a variety of different LGBTQ plus issues. And we also have a variety of different supports for parents as well, parents of gender diverse adults and gender diverse teens. So, and I do apologize here for a second, I don't actually have a chat open, so I'll see if I can get that up in a few minutes. There we go. And for right now, I will start. Yeah, thank you for being here tonight. So we are going to be interviewing two different autistic and transgender people. We're going to be talking a little bit about gender journey, how specifically we came to our identities, whether that be we found out we were transgender first or we found out we were autistic first, and then we will be exploring parts of that. A little bit about my own journey. I actually knew that I was autistic first before I realized I was non-binary. I started using they, them pronouns after I moved to Massachusetts, and I had already started going by the name Jay because it was more gender neutral, and did not realize, a lot of the reasons why I chose that option. For me, gender was never really important, so it was more so a personal decision when I moved, because I didn't want to, have this preconceived notion about who I was based on my name and things like that. And then we were at, I think, a Pride event, actually, and a friend of mine mentioned, hey, you use they, them pronouns, right? And I was very confused by the question. I didn't know that was an option. And their 5-year-old actually used they, them pronouns for me. And I was like, oh no, that actually fits really, really well. And it affirmed something for me. It was a very freeing, experience for me to actually have that happen. So I want to talk a little bit more about that intersection. A little bit of background on this topic. Transgender people are actually thought to be anywhere between 3 to 6 times more likely to meet the criteria for an autism diagnosis. You actually see a lot of the same sort of co-occurring medical conditions like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in both communities. There's a lot of reasons that people think that this overlap might exist. One of which is that I think most predominantly fits the narrative around this issue is that we are just more resistant to social conditioning. So we're more likely to think more intensely about the aspect of ourselves, and we're also more likely to be resistant to the social pressure to identify one way or another. It's a really important intersection to discuss because so many people right now are dealing with having their rights under attack. Most recently in April with the CAS review that was put out in the UK, it heavily discussed the issue of neurodiversity. I say issue of neurodiversity, but rather the intersection of neurodiversity. And although Dr. Hilary Cass could not define why this overlap existed within these two communities, or could she even have been bothered to do some research on it, she decided that any child, her vision of what gender affirming care would look like for youth in the UK was that any child that presented for gender dysphoria or other gender related affirming care requests would have to be assessed for autism. And this creates a huge barrier for some people. And there's no point or understanding in delaying that type of care when it comes to gender affirming care, because whether you're autistic or not, you are entitled to the self-determination. You have a right to self-determination, and that includes making decisions about your own medical care. So, with that background, I would like to welcome on my first guest, Justice. Justice is actually one of my partners, and I will let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Justice Egler. I am Jay's partner, their husband. I am transgender male, originally from Texas, and I moved up to Massachusetts 2018?
2018, yeah.
2018, a long time ago now. Yeah.
So, why don't you share a little bit about your experience with neurodiversity? Like, when did you first realize you were neurodivergent? I know that you do have at least one neurodivergent diagnosis, and that we are also working on more self-diagnosing. So, yeah.
Which, you know the funny story of this, but the funny story is I've known I was neurodivergent since my parents knew I was neurodivergent as a small child. But I come from the deep religious South where neurodiversity is considered a no-go. You can't have any neurodiversity. You have to be basically typical. And I got to the point where my parents did not want to get me an actual diagnosis. So when I turned 18, I actually had to go to my doctor behind my parents' back, and get my own ADHD diagnosis through a cash pay, so I wouldn't be using my father's insurance, so he would not be able to find out that I was getting ADHD treatment. And at one point, I did have a teacher later tell me that they did treat me for ADHD without my parents noticing while I was at a school. So
horrifying.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it? Just a bit.
Yeah. So I think that there's like a very good overlap with what we're seeing some people doing right now in terms of receiving gender affirming care. You're saying that, you know, the environment that you came from really valued this sort of homogeneous, everybody was the same, everybody believed the same.
You had your box that you're in. I was born female, so I was in a box of I was going to be this homemaker wife, which saying that probably caused multiple ripples of dysphoria throughout this household. I was supposed to be this picture-perfect Christian woman who was going to give birth to multiple children into the household. And I just saw 6 different phases of what on earth happened.
I sometimes forget, so it's just always like I brought you on here because you're transgender. I should have remembered. You're transgender.
I'm transgender. You forget that you married a trans man.
So it's interesting that there was like kind of this overlap there of, you know, the expectations for just being neurotypical, period.
Yes.
Like, you can't have any perceived fault.
No. We had one person who had an active neurological condition. He had Tourette's. and he was heavily shamed for making any noise in church. And that's an actual physical, it is physical, but like an actual, as they called it, a perceived condition. So me not wanting to stand still was just me being lazy. And I was also punished for that severely, as in tied to a chair at one point.
Yeah. And we do see this sort of echoed throughout, I guess, some aspects of authoritarian culture. This idea that you have to be disciplined more in order to, quote unquote, beat the autism out of you.
Exactly. You have to be disciplined more in order to get the abnormalities out of your... Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that coming from the Deep South, from that deep religious culture, that you experience this not just with other aspects of your identity, but specifically with your neurotype and your neurodiversity. So you obviously found out you were neurodivergent first, and how did that kind of impact your gender journey? Why don't we start there with how did you come to the realization that you were transgender?
And actually, I came to that realization very early on. You have spoken to my sister. I hated dresses. I hated dressing up to go to church. I was the tomboy, quote unquote. And I came to the realization very early on that I did not like being a girl. I wasn't a girl, but I couldn't say that out loud. That was not acceptable. I was 22, 23. I was still living in Texas, and I told my mother, and she's like, you know what? I don't want to go by she, her. And she was like, what do you want to go by? You know, what does that mean? And I go, I want to go by they, them for a bit. And that was one of the second hardest things I have had to explain to my mother what that meant. And she did not get it initially. She did not use the correct pronouns initially. She tried. I give her that credit. She's the only one in the family who tried. And then 2 years later, I'm sitting in a car with our other partner, Taylor. And Taylor goes, you roleplay a lot of male characters. Every single D&D character you have ever roleplayed is male. Are you projecting?
So, one of the funniest things when I was first starting my journey of researching this intersection was I spoke to one of the professionals here in our community who works at one of the local trans health clinics. And one of the things that they told me that they typically see, especially with transgender youth, but in transgender adults, part of their realization that they are transgender is that they always played a specific gender in a video game or role play setting, and they never played the gender that they were assigned with at birth. And I had to laugh because I was initially, like, I think that was right before you came out, and I was like, oh my god.
This makes so much sense.
It makes so much sense. So... that was definitely one of the things that I think is seen as a common, I guess, precursor or significant sign that somebody might want to consider thinking a little bit more in depth about their gender, is if they are consistently playing like a male character if they're assigned female at birth, or they don't feel comfortable playing characters that are in their assigned gender.
Yeah, in their assigned gender, and if they're like, I want to reach and figure out what I'm doing around here.
Yeah.
Am I projecting or am I experimenting? If the answer is yes, the answer is yes. Congratulations.
You're transgender. Welcome to the community.
Welcome to the party.
Yeah.
It's growing every day.
So, how would you say your understanding of gender has been influenced by your autism?
My understanding of gender by my autism is my autism cannot wrap its head around the dichotomy of the gender that I was raised with.
Yeah.
Because of my autism, and I've realized it's because of my autism, my brain does not think of it as the A and B. It thinks of it as all the letters of the alphabet and all the colors of the rainbow and whatever someone wants. So, what's gender? I don't know. It depends on who you're asking, what time of day it is, what the temperature is outside.
It's sort of the same thing with, like, the being autistic part of, like, how what is my level of support needs, because it's going to depend heavily on the day and what the time is, and
Yeah, exactly.
gender can vary very greatly depending on our own experiences and our own um, internal feelings on the matter. And so I guess the question there too, I think one of the, I say question there is one of the things that it makes me think of when I think about this specific topic is that being autistic is almost like being a shrimp. And you might think that's a little bit weird, but like humans only have so many rods and cones and we can only see a certain spectrum of color.
Yes.
But shrimp can see significantly more.
17 more different colors than
Yes.
the human eye can see. It's almost like I'm a biology major.
Yes, that's why I was
Who
bringing it
told
up.
you this? Who told you that fact?
And so this idea that, you know, being on one spectrum opens up another spectrum of understanding and possibility, and being able to see and understand not only how things are socially constructed, but how humans can live authentically and diversely is kind of important to the autistic experience from my experience.
Yes, I feel it's a very important from my experience as well.
Yeah. Would you see? So there's this concept in some autistic circles of this idea of queer or gender rather, and neuroqueer. And this idea is that, you know, the gender identity and neurotype are intermingled and intertwined, and they have their own distinctive, unique identity marker as a result. How would you relate to that?
I'm not 100% sure. Like, I can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Every single trans person I've known is also some version of queer.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, that was not the English that was
Yeah,
supposed
I'm
to come
pretty
out of
sure
my
all
mouth.
trans people are queer, Justice.
I meant autistic. Oh, my brain.
Yeah, I mean, every single, I think, we flock together, so it's possible that it's just the fact that we just know a lot of autistic people
Who also are
to be
transgender.
transgender.
I also know people who grew up in Texas who are transgender, have moved states, and have found out after discovering that they were transgender, oh, I'm also autistic. I also have an autistic diagnosis.
Yeah.
One of Dessa's friends, Kai.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I mean, like within the past couple months, got an autistic diagnosis.
Yeah. It's interesting how one sometimes leads to the other. I mean, you start thinking about your identity one way and you realize, well, I've always felt different, but after transitioning, I still feel different.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm still not in the same box as everyone else says they are.
Yeah. Are there particular challenges that you would say that you've encountered as a trans autistic person that you don't think that you would have encountered if you were just trans or just autistic?
If I was just trans, I probably wouldn't have the brain cell issue that we have.
For reference for those in the audience, we have a small plushie of a brain cell that we have in this household because one of our sayings is that, oh, who has the brain cell today? If we are all unable to think, having executive dysfunction, etc., and whoever has the brain cell gets the plushy brain cell.
Yes, basically. And I normally use that as it also kind of signifies my autism at times, especially since I work in medical field. Having that rapid pace, my autistic and my ADHD are actually very helpful. Being transgender in those fields sort of is a non-factor, but also has popped up, especially when working in emergency rooms, where certain people only want certain genders in their room. And they will get upset with you, especially in Texas, if you are not the perceived gender.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. We have a question from the audience. Molly asks, how did your experience change moving from Texas, both from the autistic and transgender perspective?
A lot more open. I actually got a lot more both acceptance and understanding of people in general after leaving Texas. And I also kind of understood more clearly where my people from my hometown were coming from, the isolated box that they were kind of in. Because when I finally came out as male to my mother and my father, but my mother's the one who jumped on board and basically announced it to our entire hometown that I am male. Refused to let anyone say that she had two daughters. She has a daughter and a son. And she has been semi-ostracized from the community. And it kind of shows me both where they're coming from, and because I can see that viewpoint, I live that viewpoint. I know where they're coming from. I don't accept where they're coming from. But I also can come up here, talk about this openly, and not feel that sense of shame that I did down south. Mm. I don't have to hide that part about me. I can say it openly. I can walk outside and not feel like, oh, I need to wear my binder 24/7.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's this general assumption sometimes from people up in the north where they sometimes don't understand the perspective or where people are coming from the south or more rural areas, and they think it's this place of ignorance and things like that. And for a lot of times
it is a place of ignorance, but it's a place of ignorance because you don't have the outward experience. Yeah. It's a place of ignorance because you're in a bubble. Yeah. And a bubble that is really hard to pop from the inside. You have to pop it from the outside.
Yeah. I guess the other question that kind of begs this too is how has your relationship with your family changed from before you came out to after?
Surprisingly, other than my father, most of my relationships with my family have gotten much better. My mother is more accepting and is more willing to hear me out. Mm-hmm. She's more willing to hear my sister out as well. My sister is the one who always has my back. She's always had my back, and when this came out, her first immediate reaction was, okay, cool, bro. It's always been who you are, so carry on, whatever you say. My extended family, we don't talk at all, except for my grandmother, yeah, who has basically named me the first grandson, which was a very open thing, as did my grandfather before he passed last June. But select members of my family, it has gotten better. Other members of my family are either trying to keep the peace or pretend I don't exist. And I let them do it because it's not worth the fight.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, well, this is an interesting perspective. I know where they're coming from, but I don't agree. And it's a bubble.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think definitely what we saw with your mom was that she realized that if she didn't put in the work to understand and listen, that she was going to lose that relationship.
Correct.
Yeah.
And she kind of learned that because I told her that if she did not attempt to put forward effort in our relationship, I was going to go no contact. Mm-hmm. Because I was afraid, because I had been threatened multiple times throughout my young adult of basically being disinherited, disowned from the family. And I told him that I was not going to stand for that anymore. I wasn't going to do it. I'm coming out as completely male. I'm male. He, him pronouns. You will respect that or I will no longer communicate. And Diane went, okay. Yes, sir. You're my son.
Yep. I think that's a great example of boundary setting, of like, you know, this is what I need for my mental health, and if that need is not met, this is what I'm going to do.
Exactly.
You know, the focus is on personal responsibility.
Especially when they're in that bubble, you kind of have to say, here is the black and white of it. This is what you're going to do, and this is what I'm expecting of you. If you do not do what I expect of you, if those two things do not align,
Yeah,
I'm not going to communicate.
Yeah, I can't control your actions.
But I will control mine.
Yep. This is what I would like to see.
This is what I hope for. But this is what is going to happen if that does not happen.
Yeah, definitely. So, are there challenges that you have experienced as someone from Texas with receiving, not necessarily gender affirming medical care, but receiving the aspects of your gender affirmation that you might not? I guess I'm wording this weirdly, but basically, we've talked a little bit about how you can't go through the whole legal gender transition because of where you're from.
Yes.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Because I am from the state of Texas, and because Governor Abbott and probably Lieutenant Patrick have some words about them, have basically made it very clear that if anyone comes out and has attempted to change their birth certificate, they will be put on a list. I cannot legally change my birth certificate in Texas, which means I cannot legally change my birth certificate in Massachusetts either. Because if I get it reassigned to Massachusetts, the one in Texas does get notified. And so I go on that list. And because I can't get it legally changed, I have to just go by non-binary on everything. So I can't get my passport changed to male, technically can't get my driver's license changed to male, technically can't get my work identity changed to male. All of them except me, technically, as male. Like, no one at my job is going to call me she, her.
Yeah.
No one in HR says Miss Justice. They all call me Mr.
Yeah. You know, for Jay, how is it as a partner on the other side having the person you love being unaccepted by their family? And how has your friends or family understood this experience of both you and Justice? Understanding, helpful, supportive. I feel like we get a lot of understanding and support from the people that around us. I think the people who really matter are from Justice's family are the people that we're most connected to. It hasn't felt isolating, actually, because I never knew those family. The family that matters are the people that I've actually met and the people who have supported us as a family. So I guess the one example I can give of a time in which maybe it didn't feel that way was when your grandfather passed away. And I'm sorry.
No, you're...
But yeah, there was some family drama that I was shielded from until Justice brought it up to me, wherein I guess, was it your uncle?
It was technically my uncle's parents. So
Your great uncle and great aunt.
yes.
Yeah, where they attempted to get myself, Justice, and our daughter.
Just you and Skylar.
Just me and Skylar. Removed from the obituary as surviving members of the family. They wanted, Skylar wasn't biologically related to Justice, so she couldn't have been the surviving grandchild.
The surviving great-grandchild.
Oh, surviving great-grandchild, rather.
And for extra context of that, I do have a step-cousin, my biological uncle's stepdaughter, whose son is considered, or was considered by that same great-uncle as a legitimate great-grandchild of my grandfather. No blood relation, not actually in the family. Jessica has no relationship with any of us, never talks to any of us, but was going to be included.
Yep, and it was specifically because they viewed the union as an unholy union because we are of the same sex, and so it really had their excuse was that our daughter is not biologically related to him, but the reality was it was because they didn't view our relationship as being valid.
And the only reason why they weren't even trying to get me taken off of it was because they knew my grandmother wouldn't take that at all. Yeah. That was the line that they were like, well, we're just going to be we're going to pretend like this part doesn't bother us, despite the fact we have made it very clear this part bothers us. But yeah, let's just draw that line in the sand. Definitely won't cause any issues. Yeah, my grandmother raised hell.
All right, Justice, thank you for answering all of my very invasive questions that I obviously already knew the answers to. But thank you for letting our audience know.
You're welcome.
You are dismissed.
Wow, dismissal from my wife.
So no, thank you, Molly. We are going to transition into speaking to our next guest. So just give me a moment to get that set up. All right. All right. Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, I can. Let me turn off the live stream that I have in my other
All right.
in my other ear. I can't see you though.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to turn off the camera too, so it's just you right now.
Oh dear, hi.
Um all right. So can you hear? Just
Yes,
doing a
I can
quick
hear
check.
you.
Real quick. I'm doing this so the tech
Can you hear
person.
me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, cool.
Cool. So can you see the camera?
You might need to adjust Jasper down a little bit. Jasper's much louder than you are.
I cannot do that. So, all right. So, the first question I have for you is kind of similar to the question that I had for.
Well, should I introduce myself first?
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead, introduce yourself.
All right. Well, hi, I am Jasper Leffler. I am non-binary. I am ADHD. And I also am a facilitator for Dungeons and Dragons at A&E. I'm from Connecticut originally. I currently live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, excellent. So, thank you for introducing yourself. Jasper has been a long time friend of mine. We went to college together. Um, and I think is one of our most, I would say, valuable assets. Our D&D program is pretty good. I am not sure why that is happening, actually. Sorry, we're having a bit of a tech issue here. For those in the audience, so I can see Jasper, but apparently you cannot. So,
Great.
yeah, which is totally fine. We have the Zoom window open, and they can hear you. So, can you share a little bit about your personal journey discovering and understanding your gender identity as a trans person?
Yeah, I can. Oh yeah, no, I can't be shown. I'm not online, I guess. um, well, as a trans person, ooh, sorry, where do I want to start? So I've known that I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 7 or 8. I've known that about myself for quite a long time. I grew up in Connecticut. I had a really good system of like school psychologists and professionals who were very clear at explaining to me about ADHD and what that was. What I didn't know at the time is I was also being evaluated for autism. I was, however, evaluated under the DSM-4, which precluded a autism and an ADHD diagnosis from happening at the same time. And ADHD was clearly my more prevalent struggle at ages 7 and 8. So I've known that for quite a bit. I found out I've always been kind of a little uncomfortable with being a girl, with a lot of the some of the social stuff that came along with that. I didn't like dresses. I didn't like pink, very typical, tomboy stuff. I was very outdoorsy as a kid, very science oriented, which was also seen as kind of masculine, strangely. But I kind of came into my own as a non-binary person around 14, 15, 16. Um, and I came out again at first to some friends, and then to like my some more people around at school, to the point where most people at school knew I was non-binary. And actually, somebody's parent asked my mother about my gender before I came out to her. So that was a little awkward, but yeah, we made it work. And then I was basically out full time as a non-binary person by the time I went to Mount Holyoke.
Nice. Um, so
And then
yes, your autism journey.
my autism journey starts around the same time as my transgender journey. Um, when a friend of mine in high school who was trans femme was like, "Are you sure you're not autistic? Are you sure you're not autistic?" Like, I had a number of autistic friends, and we found, as you mentioned with justice, we found that a lot of queer people and trans people and autistic people tend to flock together. Autistic people tend to understand each other much better. And then over time, upon review of some of my diagnosis materials, it just kind of came to light that I was autistic. So I am technically self-diagnosed, but I do have a lot of supporting documentation around that.
Yeah. And I want to preface here too that AANE as a community in general supports self-diagnosis. We recognize that diagnosis is a huge hurdle and barrier for some people. I myself initially was also diagnosed in a school setting, so it was by a school psychologist who tried to get my mother to go for a more professional diagnosis because they also couldn't decide whether I was ADHD or autistic initially. So,
We love the DSM-4.
yeah, they gave me the Asperger's diagnosis, so I had an educational diagnosis of Asperger's for quite a while. And I see somebody else in the audience had a very similar experience of them not being able to figure out whether or not it was ADHD or autism because at the time you couldn't have both. And now I have a diagnosis of both. So yeah, one often precludes the other, and self-diagnosis is incredibly valid.
Yeah, and I'm 25 at this point. I'm not going back to a psychologist. I don't need that. I don't need somebody to tell me I'm autistic.
Yeah.
And I receive all the support that I need through my ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah. So, how would you say your autism has necessarily influenced your understanding of your gender identity? Would you, and what are your thoughts about terms like gender and neuroqueer?
So I personally don't identify with gender or neuroqueer. It's just I I personally for myself see my willingness to come out as more of a reflection of my autism than my actual gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
That I find that it was easier. I was already, separated from the norm. I was already I grew up in a not a similarly homogenous, but a differently homogenous group place as Justice. And I was already in an out group, so putting myself in another out group didn't really endanger me. It didn't really change people's perception of me that much.
Yeah.
But honestly, I don't see it personally as a big impact on my gender identity.
So yeah, I think that's a really good way to showcase that. Like, not everybody has the same experience of their identity when it comes to being trans and autistic. Or not just like a homogenous intersection. We all experience things differently and on a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
on many spectrums.
On many spectrums. This is why it's called the double rainbow. So are there any particular, like, I asked Justice this question as well, but are there particular challenges or strengths that you've encountered as a trans autistic person that you don't feel like you would have encountered if you were just trans or just autistic?
I mean, I have been lucky enough in my life to have, of course, for all of medical providers that I've had to have been accepting of all of these things, to have, again, like therapists and psychologists that I work with be understanding that I may be autistic, but I'm not seeking a diagnosis. and being able to basically be believed in most of these settings. I occasionally run in, when I used to participate in a lot of online discourse, I would run into a lot of online discourse, a lot of issues with that. People being like, well, you can't be this. You're nothing like my 8-year old son. You can use the computer.
Yeah.
That's a common one. You get people, talking, looking down on my experience of autism because it's not the same as their children's. And one, I don't think it's fair to compare me to your 8-year old son where I am right now. I
Because you're not
am
an 8
neither
year old
eight.
boy.
I am not an 8-year old boy, despite what my interests may look like. Um, I'm a massive like fan, so that's what we're talking about here. But also some other issues are just presenting, I guess. I mean, presenting as non-binary is always a difficult thing to kind of talk about, but I have so little difficulty, I mean, such difficulty understanding positioning myself socially as an autistic person already that adding being transgender into it can just feel very overwhelming at times.
Yeah, definitely. I think, um, one of the things that we really see is that this idea of minority stress is also one of the things that some people use to explain it, but I think it's very apt at explaining the experience that some autistic and transgender people have of like, um, you have minority stress from one marginalized identity that contributes to the minority stress of another marginalized identity.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess one of my biggest issues recently is I play Magic the Gathering at my local game store, and all of the guys there are very nice, very civil, but not necessarily accepting. And I always find it difficult to position like when I want to remind people of my pronouns because I know not everybody is misgendering me intentionally. These aren't, close friends. These aren't people who see me every day, but I don't want to sound like a broken record, you know?
Yeah. And so I guess that kind of brings me to the next question because you're living in a state that doesn't necessarily have the most friendly laws and I guess there's now this kind of understanding in places that I'm gonna totally speak from place of privilege here, living in the
Hmm.
extremely blue Northeast. Of you do see this common stereotype of or understanding of how people must think and believe further south, as we just discussed with justice.
Hmm.
That the reason their politics are this way is because the majority of the people in the state are bigoted or not understanding, etc. And I know that that's not often not the case and often not that true. But are there particular challenges that you have found living in Florida? Because I know that you've also lived up here in the very blue Northeast. Um, that in regards to receiving gender affirming care, in regards to social transition, things like that. Yeah,
So I'm going to touch on the big point first,
yeah,
which is medical care. That's the thing that is specifically legally being stigmatized here in Florida. I did realize they did get rid of the original consent form here, which did list hormone replacement therapy as a sex change prescription, which was upsetting to read. But I did actually pull up. So basically, here in Florida, you have to sign a consent form that is filed with the government to receive hormone replacement therapy. Previously to this law, I was on HRT. I decided to go off of it. I was on masculinizing HRT, and I decided to go off of it because of this law, which requires me to sign a what I believe to be a demeaning form that also lists me in the government as transgender. And Also, they have prevented nurse practitioners from being able to prescribe hormone replacement therapy. Only doctors, an MD or OD, can do that.
yeah. So that's
Um, and uh, contain contain multiple pages of untrue and frightening information. It lists that medical treatment of people with gender dysphoria is based on a very limited, poor quality research with only subtle improvements seen in some patients' psychological functioning, which is objectively false. Um, they repeatedly emphasize that a medication is prescribed off label, which is true, but they demonize that tons of medications are prescribed off label every single day. Um, and they list a lot of very, upsetting things that could happen to you, and they emphasize all of the bad things that can happen without listing any of the good things.
Yeah. So, I guess that kind of, brings up the question too. This is not a question that I know I sent to you, but
Mm-hmm.
in your view, what are some of those good things
I
that
mean,
come from
I
that?
was my girlfriend, who also lives here and is a trans woman, she did choose to continue hormone replacement therapy after this,
Mm-hmm.
after the legislation change. But it allowed me to feel more embodied in myself and in my body, which can be a struggle, both for transgender people and autistic people.
Yeah.
And I think that that is something that's really hard to quantify.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that, yeah, I think that that's something that's really hard to quantify and really hard to value from necessarily a purely scientific standpoint. And that things like this and limiting access, limiting who can provide it, what is, generally considered a safe treatment, is going to turn people off from experience. I mean, it turned me off from, being able to embody your internal vision of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely the experience of being present and active in your own body is something that we all have a challenge with. And
Mm-hmm.
I am so sorry that that experience was taken away from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, are
And to the
there, like,
social thing,
huh?
if you want to talk about the social stuff a little bit
Yeah,
more as well.
that was the next question I
Yeah.
was going to bring up. Was I know that you and I have talked about this separately, but
Mm-hmm.
have you noticed like a change in how you're socially perceived or social rights that you have previously enjoyed? Has there been any difference in your perspective and experience, or in the perspective or experience of others that you know in Florida
I
since these
mean,
laws have gone into effect?
luckily for me personally, as an adult, as somebody who can choose the people that I am around, the company I work for is relatively progressive. A&E also is a great, great place to work. Um, I haven't seen any issues with that socially. I know a lot. My sister recently graduated high school down here, and I know that a lot of the kids in the schools are kind of facing the brunt of that, and it's upsetting for me as a transgender adult that the kids are having to bear the brunt of this.
Yeah, yeah. They're shouldering that load
They're
along more.
shouldering that load, and it feels like, as somebody who doesn't have a kid, there's very little I can do about it.
Yeah,
And very, it's not a great play. It's not a great time for that.
yeah, and I think just to speak on like what's like going on that we're seeing nationally too is that even if you do have a kid who's in the school system, and you're going to a lot of these like school board meetings and town hall meetings and things like that, oftentimes your voice gets drowned out as a parent by people that really don't have a stake. They're not real stakeholders outside of being taxpayers in your community. They don't have children that are currently in the school system, but they're
Yeah.
very frequently talking over people.
Yeah, I've seen these kind of sort of activist politicians, who are not stakeholders in the education system, actually in both Massachusetts and Florida,
Yeah.
come to take over. So there was somebody running for school board up near where we went to school for a while, who was just like a notorious bully, basically, who took it upon himself, despite not having a child, to run for school board, and not having any stake in that system.
Yeah. So, um, I guess one of we talked about how some of the negative things that have affected you down there. What support systems have you found or resources have been most helpful for you?
Other trans people. Other trans people are, I think, one of the most valuable things you can have in your life as a trans person. They give you so much perspective on things, and especially other trans people that you might not share other identities with. Um, and it helps you play. It helps to place things in context. It gives you a place where you do feel affirmed. You do feel like yourself. I'm not having. I have friend groups who are trans, who I don't have to remind every moment about that. Who I'm not afraid of being too much for, or who I'm not afraid of, you know, positioning myself in a place of authority on myself.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that we see in both the trans community and the autistic community is that peer support is the number one mitigating factor when it comes to minority stress and mental health outcomes. So, the even in my own life, I also have a lot of transgender friends. You just met my transgender husband. I mean, you didn't just meet him. I know, Jasper, that you definitely know Justice. Um, but yeah, that can be. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have a question in the chat too.
Yeah.
Do you have any words of advice for the younger generation that is shouldering the brunt of this?
I mean, God, it. I was talking to my sister about this the other day. It blows my mind that at 25, I am as at 25 as somebody who has been out for a decade, that I am seen as an authority, as an elder almost to some people. But I just want to take a moment to address that. This Pride Month, we're thinking about celebrating ourselves, but we're also thinking about the entire generation of people that we've lost to AIDS and to medical, that we continue to lose due to medical mistreatment. Transgender people we continue to lose due to medical mistreatment, and that we're so strapped for resources that we're coming to me as an authority is just something that I want everyone to take a minute to sit with. But I always, you treat people with respect, and you demand respect, but you meet people where they're at. Um, as I'm just down here with what I consider, regular people. I realize that some of the stuff that I may talk about, that being non-binary, is something that they've either only heard about on Fox News and the internet, or that I'm dealing with people who are asking me why bears get their own stripe on the pride flag. Um, and actual question I did have to field. The black and brown on the Philadelphia pride flag do represent black and brown racial minorities,
Yes.
not large hairy gay men. In case you were wondering.
Yeah. Thank you
And
for.
if you're coming at somebody with that, somebody who might want to be accepting, somebody who might not otherwise have an opinion, but their understanding is so base level, you don't have to subject yourself to that all of the time. Of course, you are allowed to find places where you are comfortable, allowed to find places, and you're allowed to demand respect. But sometimes you have to sit with that work, and it's not fair. It's not. But
Yeah.
you got to do what you can you got to fight for your place to be where you are, and sometimes that's vocal fighting, and sometimes that's sitting down and having a conversation.
Yeah. It's picking your battles and
Mm-hmm.
knowing what is most appropriate in which situation and what is the safest for you in that situation
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Yeah, it's not safe for me to be correcting people in the way that I did when I was at Mount Holyoke.
Yeah.
And I mean safe, not even that somebody would physically attack me, but that it would just ostracize me more from that social space. And that's a space I value.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. And I also want to reiterate here too is like, you know, in comparison to the youth that is bearing the brunt of this, you know, these
Mhm.
are largely teenagers. We are the elders. We've kind of lived through this. Um, and I do recognize that, you know, I also have a lot of difficulty recognizing that I'm considered an elder queer at my age.
My
And
darling, you have a child?
I know. Um, but we have this embodied experience and we have lived through these experiences. You know, what highlighted for me that I was an elder queer once was, especially up here in this incredibly blue environment, where somebody was, I was talking with our neighbor who is significantly younger, and they were absolutely mind blown by the fact that I got in trouble for having a female prom date.
Hmm. And I mean, that's mind blowing to me as somebody who's just
Yeah.
a little less than 5 years younger than you.
Yeah. Like, we made so much progress, and it's really disconcerting to see us sliding back to where, even before where I was
Hmm.
in high school.
Yeah, I mean, the mandating of use, I mean, I believe Florida mandates that you have to, that students, teachers have to use students' legal names. And that's just a wild concept to
Yeah.
consider. I mean, the amount of names kids go by.
Yeah, I mean, I went by Lizard
Yeah,
in high school.
I went by Stormy in one class
Yeah.
as like it was a Doctor Who joke. That wasn't even.
Yeah. Or people used to call me Kim because of Kim Pines from, what was it? Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Um, so I guess I want to leave this last message off with, it's funnily enough, I actually had this question here, but like,
Mhm.
what is a last message that you would like to share with the audience about understanding and supporting trans autistic people like yourself? What is something that you would like them to know about how they could better support people like you?
I mean, it's a lot of it is about respect. As a neurodivergent person and as a trans person, we are often struggling with autonomy over our bodies, over our minds, over ourselves. And even if you're not saying the right words, even if you're not fully educated on anything, giving us the respect to be the experts on ourselves is life changing. I have, had again people that I've met down here through gaming who again have never met another trans person before, have don't have any clue what to say, but it is surprisingly easy to tell when where people are coming from, whether they are coming from a place of respect but ignorance or where they're coming from a place of immediate disrespect. And I think that's the core to understanding and supporting people.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Jasper. Thank you for sharing your experiences and bringing your usual charismatic self. So, all right. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Good night to
Good
you,
night.
but not to our audience. I have a few
Oh,
last minute words for you all. We're going to switch real quick over here. Um, so that was fantastic. I thank you all for sitting with me while we interview these very amazing people. Um, I I know that we had a lot that we talked about tonight, and I just wanted to end on a note of just reiterating that we do actually have quite a bit of resources here at AA&E. And if you look at your screen, you can see there is a QR code that you can use to access some of these services. If you go to our website, you will be able to see this under services and programs. I'm just going to make sure that I'm giving you the right information here as we talk. Some of our programs are free. Some of them do require a fee, but we do offer some assistance, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us. So if you go under services and programs, you can find support groups, and then you can go down to adult support groups, and it should show up as an LGBTQ plus option. If you go under autism info and frequently asked questions, there is actually at the very end under intersectional identities, you can click on LGBTQ plus, and that will bring you to a part of our website where we include several highlighted articles about gender identity, sexuality, and autism. And then you can also find our the number for the Trevor Project, as well as a link to AA&E's LGBTQ plus programming. And so typically what we do here at AA&E, we have workshops and webinars. We do offer training for professionals as well on this intersection. I facilitate a training on gender identity and autism. And we also run a variety, again, of support groups for gender diverse individuals, LGBTQ plus individuals. We have support groups for gay men. We also have support groups for parents of gender diverse adults and teens. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I hope you all have a great rest of your night, and if you have any questions or comments, please share them. Thank you.